our time together here, studying the generation of love and compassion. May we further our understanding and practice of the Buddha Dharma for the sake of all beings throughout space and time, and so that the Sangha may flourish. May it be so. So the first thing about this workshop is it's a teaching in not believing everything you read, because it's not about the Heart Sutra. It's about generating love and compassion. And that's because at the last workshop, we didn't get all the way through. It took us, I think it took us 2 workshops to get through the 7 practices of the Bodhisattva. And, you know, rightly so. We made a decision a while ago that rather than do a 9 to noon and additionally a 2 to 5 long day, that was very taxing for everybody. And so the afternoon sessions seemed to be better. And so, you know, we do more of them. And it takes a little longer to get through the content. But today, we're going to complete our Ango's teaching with generating love and compassion. And you can see, hopefully, that our big plot here is to go through literally every line of the daily liturgy and have that really thoroughly explicated so that folks have that as a resource, not only for those present here at the moment and those watching online, but those in the future who may wish to understand something more about the liturgical stuff. So recently the podcast has been putting out the teaching retreats, which I'm delighted about. Some brave souls are transcribing those, or will be, and editing those down. So anyway, this I expect will be part of that series. And it seems to be the case that next Ango shall focus on the Heart Sutra as its primary text. And then we'll have a whole Ango to just really do that. As a little bit of contextualizing for these teachings, you should know that when you're looking at a teaching, when you're encountering a teaching, there are different baskets that the teaching can be a part of. Some teachings that you'll receive are very much in the equanimity basket, okay? They have to do with presence and being in the moment, and it has a lot to do with renouncing unhelpful states of mind and stopping the bleeding, you know, not doing harmful things, finding equanimity, okay? And there are many, many teachings that fall squarely into that category. And when you read those teachings or encounter those teachings, they often have a flavor of solitude, it's salted with solitude, I guess I would say. It's very much talking about you as an individual practitioner finding equanimity, okay, and knowing how to do so. And this is reflected in the beginning practice of Zazen, where we teach right away putting the mind in the one point, being aware of what the hara is, the tanchen, and learning how to physically be centered in the body, okay? And this is absolutely foundational. This is absolutely root practice, literally and figuratively, right? Without sufficient equanimity, without sufficient samadhi, the rest is just wishful thinking. So the first order of business in your Zen Buddhist trajectory has to do with cultivating equanimity and finding equanimity. And this is not a one and done. This is this is an ongoing area, okay? Fundamentals, real fundamental. And let's be transparent about it. I mean, I am not in a state of equanimity 24/7, 365. That's just not the case. I can become irritated and lose track, and like everybody else. However, I prevent myself from actually enacting the worst, mostly, and I have a lot of experience at feeling those waves of angst or irritation or whatever it is, and so I can catch them pretty far upstream because they're very well known. So it's something like that, okay? I don't want people to have the idea that once you attain some state of equanimity, you just live in this unperturbed peace for the rest of your days, and, you know, horseshit. Not true. Not true, and not even useful, I don't think. But knowing how to have equanimity is critically important. Then The next sort of area or basket of teachings is karuna, or compassion teachings. And clearly, this is our topic today, right? Now, karuna teachings really have to do with compassion and the mind of bodhicitta, the mind of coming to awakening on the behalf of all beings and for the sake of all beings. Now, equanimity is generally presented in terms of you must quiet your mind or you're in a world of pain. Learn how to take care of and have custody of your mind stream. And this is very much for you, right? Then this comes to fruition or good enough, then compassion teachings come along, right? And this is how does a bodhisattva engage in the world? A much wider world than just you having your moment of equanimity. What about the rest of the world? How do we deal with all the calamities and all the trials of daily life, let alone moments of history and calamity? And so there's a whole series of teachings there that would fall into the compassion category. So you have mind training, equanimity kind of teachings, and then you have compassion kinds of teachings, which also can have mind training, but it's always about developing the mind and the heart of compassion. And then the third basket then is wisdom teachings. These are teachings that are about the true nature of reality, the nature of the self, wisdom, right? So the Heart Sutra is clearly right in the center of that wisdom literature. We call it the Prajnaparamita literature, right? The perfection of wisdom teachings. And there are other teachings, there are other, kind of like ancillary appendices kind of teachings, skillful means, knowing how to skillfully meet the moment, these kinds of things. But generally, if you understand these three areas of practice, you got a pretty good grip on what's going on. And one thing that causes students a lot of confusion is not understanding the categories of teaching, because the teachings are, on the face, self-contradictory, right? So if the teaching is, if you're looking at an equanimity-minded teaching, it's going to say things like, you need to take custody of your mind and be centered and be present and all this, it's about you. And then you say, well, what about everyone else? So then compassion teachings handle that, But if you just see the compassion teachings without understanding equanimity, you can be really pulled out of your own center because you're out there trying to help everybody, so you think, but you don't have equanimity, and so this is kind of a problem. So it's like self agency, your ability to have enough samadhi of mind, and then community and communion and helping others. So there are different kinds of teachings, and they, like as I said, at the face of them, they're contradictory. And then also, wisdom teachings contradict both of those. There's no one else. There's no self, there's no other. What you're worried about, The true nature of the self is no self. So who is it that's concentrated and who are you worrying about? Okay, now, so the thing is though, if you understand these in their fullest, they completely harmonize with each other. They don't contradict with each other at all. It's just that they have different areas of emphasis. Okay, and so that when one is a fully realized human Buddha, you can easily maneuver in and out of these three different areas of practice as needed. As needed, okay? They map on the body such that equanimity is here in the hara, in the one point. Wisdom is sort of here in the third eye and the head. And then the interplay between the two is compassion. The way this is traditionally taught in Zen training is that you have built up the base of equanimity, very, very strong, very, very intense samadhi in the depths of retreat, this kind of thing. And the mind becomes very clear, very supple, and very subtle, and then can slip into an experience of wisdom, typically facilitated by koan. And then the result of this encounter with wisdom is compassion. Compassion instantly arises from the experience of prajna, of self. When you see that your self-nature and the nature of other is the same, then compassion immediately arises from this. However, this is not always the case. I think this is often the case, but this is not necessarily the case in my experience. It is possible for someone to have insight into wisdom and not really have compassion come online much. It can happen. It's a little bit, it's not sufficient to accept and assume that this is going to happen. And so other tradition, the Lupa lineage, Tibetan tradition, but really any Mahayana tradition, but specifically the Tibetan practices, they tend to really put an emphasis on karuna and compassion training. So it's really a very actively cultivated practice. You could say in rough sketch, and this is far too rough and not to be taken literally, but the Pali tradition Buddhist practices tend to be very equanimity-based, mindfulness-based. Thai forest tradition teachings, which came to us and became the mindfulness movement in kind of secular garb and all that. It's very much mindfulness of the moment. You could say, and again, rough sketch, unfairly said, but I'll say it anyway, that the Tibetan lineage is really good at compassion training. They're very strong in this area. When you listen to the Dalai Lama speak, odds are really good it's going to be about compassion, and it's something you should listen to. And they do a lot of training in developing of compassion. And then roughly said, again, unfairly said, I'll say it anyway, Zen is really about wisdom in its origin. It's really all the dice get kind of thrown onto this wisdom piece. You've got to have Kensho, you've got to realize self-nature, see. So the tradition, historically, again, a lot of softeners, because there's exemptions to this, but in general, what's happening is that the Dharma now, in the 21st century, these different wisdom traditions are commingling and having access with each other in a way that's quite unprecedented in human history. And so there's a lot of developing and cross-exchange, and also uncovering elements of each tradition itself that wasn't really transmitted well, if at all, of necessity, when a person who doesn't speak English is coming over here as a refugee and they're trying to teach and the students don't speak Japanese and you've got a whole lot of stuff to figure out even to say hi to each other, you have to pick your battles, right? And it's the same thing with the Tibetan diaspora and so on. All this is just simply to say that the truth is that I don't feel there are really all these different sects and different schools. There's just the Buddha Dharma. And we all just practice the Buddha Dharma, and that's it. And we have lineages of influence for which the Buddha Dharma is correctly transmitted, that's for sure. But the bottom line is, in any Mahayana Buddha Dharma practice, you've got to have equanimity, compassion, and wisdom. Does that make sense to everybody? So let's pause here and see if there are any questions or comments on this much, and we will need one of those handhelds to, if Mijinho or so on, somebody could grab one of the handhelds. We can maybe have some conversation around it if there's any to be had.
Who's got to figure this out?
It's in the bottom of it. Turn it around and push the little red button thing. Yeah. Okay, so does anybody have a question or a comment or an observation or anything? Profound silence. Oh, so on. Okay, yep.
What's the actual check?
No, the speakers are off, so it's just for the online folks.
Okay.
Talk into the thing again, and if you online folks can hear, can you give a thumbs up?
Hello. Greetings, folks.
There we are.
All right.
Beautifully done. Thank you.
What's the actual definition of equanimity?
Gosh, the actual definition of equanimity.
Because the first time I heard that word was the very first time I walked through the temple doors.
Yeah. Well, we were dealing with an election that was a surprise to everyone, and there was a lot of consternation and concern, and so equanimity was the key of the moment. But what I would say is that, equanimity has to do with a mind that is unshakable. All right? Unshakable vow, right? An unshakability. And it's the sense that the pendulum still swings, but it's in a much lower, narrower bandwidth than being flopped all over the place, Somebody says, hey, I'm walking here, and you're like, whoa, and you go right back at them with equal measure, right? That's not equanimity, that's being hooked, You're in a confusing environment, and an awkward thing starts to happen, and you kind of like keep your cool. That's an equanimity, right? So that's the surface or the mundane. Excuse me. The mundane reading is you have some stability and non-reactivity in the midst of life circumstance. Okay. It's rather like a gazelle is always very skittish. It's like if you look at a gazelle or any prey animal, they're always kind of like looking around. Their eyes are open. They're like not sure. They're always doing this, right? Something happens. Whoop, whoop, whoop. It's kind of like that. And then the predator is not like that. The lion doesn't do that. She's just kind of walking. She's slow. Everything is very deliberate. You know what I mean? And it's not a lot of like looking all over the place. And when they focus in, they just get real focused. There's this kind of a clear being present. Now, the gazelle is present too, believe me, but the mind being less reactive in daily life so that you can actually be more responsive. It's not your triggers and conditioning that are acting out. It's actually more volitional how you respond, okay? But the supramundane understanding of equanimity has to do with samadhi. And this means that the mind is in so thoroughly concentrated a state that your sense of self erodes. When you become so deeply concentrated, the sense of you concentrating is no longer relevant. You just merge. So that merging is also equanimity. So, for example, when you're sitting a period of zazen, it's quite possible that for some chunk of it, you're very much conscious of yourself as a separate entity who's regretting the decision to sit or waiting for the bell to ring or feeling great about being here or whatever. There's a story, And then eventually, if you're doing your job, you're, let us say, you're concentrating on the breath. There are other practices to be sure, but let's say your breath concentration begins, then you start to disidentify with the story. You don't push it away, but you're not identifying with it. And you start more and more identifying with the breathing to the point where it's you identifying with the breathing is better than you being pulled around by the mind stream's random stuff. But there's still a you and a breath. If you keep going and you keep really digging and you stay attuned, you will slip into a complete merging with the breath that can no longer be adequately described as you are concentrating on your breath. There's just the breath breathing itself. And that state is samadhi state, which is what equanimity is. And samadhi is a Sanskrit term, as I understand it, and there's a Pali version of it, but it means this concentrated state of mind. Okay? Now, strictly speaking, there are several different levels of this. They're called jhana states. There are many, many different layers to it, and that's one of the jobs of a Zen teacher, is to be able to feel where a student is with those different things and guide them through skillfully. So mundane answer is equanimity means keeping cool under pressure in daily life. responding, not reacting. The supramundane answer, I would say, is samadhi, merging with the moment fully. That's true equanimity. Which you can see where the distinction between equanimity teaching and wisdom teaching collapses then. Because when you see the true nature of the self and the true nature of the moment, and they're not separate, you just merge in, and there's just this one dharma happening. Okay, does that help? Anybody else? Seems not. Okay, anybody online? Seems not. Okay, all right, so let's, having set some context up, then let's look at this generating love and compassion text itself. Now, this is a consistent part of our daily liturgy. It's something that I hold as an expectation for any member, really, but definitely anyone who's received Jukai or more would daily, hopefully, more days than not anyway, be training the mind. Okay, when you if you look at these like, you know, Father told me to do 2 Hail Marys and then I'm forgiven, and you kind of click them off so that the accounting sheet is correct and in your favor, you've missed it. Okay. If you look at the daily liturgy as something that you just have to click off and get it done because Roshi said so, then you might as well not. It's not going to help you much anyway. Do something that's more juicy for you, you know. But if approached the right way, you should see this as mind training, so that we are consistently and regularly reminding ourselves of what our values are, because the world continues to, churn, and circumstances, positive, negative, and neutral, keep presenting and shuffling. The deck gets shuffled all the time on us, and there's a reason why the tradition has all of these mind training kinds of elements. For example, the evening gatha, let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. There's a reason why we say those things, because we forget. That's why we forget. Everybody forgets this stuff, me too. And so I'm grateful to be reminded of these things. I know in my cognitive pursuits that I agree. And I not only agree with this, I feel that this actually expresses truth universally. And I wish in my highest and deepest self and moments to live this way. And then I don't. Because I forget. And that's not because Jay Wyke is particularly inept. It's just because I'm a human, like we all are. And so that's when Rinsen has to show up. Right? That's where it's like, hey, dude, we can do better than that, And there is that level of it, and we need all the help we can get. I sure do. And so one of the forms of this help is this daily, hopefully, mind training. So the liturgy is not something that we're reciting to a disembodied entity who's listening and keeping score. It's not like that. It's for ourselves, so that we can actually stay on our track together. That this makes sense, that this is real, right? And one of the qualities that shows up in a sincere practitioner of the Dharma is that they feel something is lacking and they want to practice more. That's not a contraindicator. That's actually what it looks like. When someone is starting to really have the Dharma awaken in them, there's actually a sacred yearning for more Dharma that comes up. More truth, more reality. Not in an obsessive or addictive way, but in a completely pure and whole way, a beautiful and healthy way. It's like when you, look at the eyes of your child for the first time, and there's a great love, and there's a yearning for more of that love. There's no way in which that is unhealthy. And so in a parallel or similar way, when we start to encounter the Dharma for real, an ache starts to arise to encounter it more. And this is a very good sign. And this keeps going. So we have these trainings to help us respond and to find a way to make the teachings more a part of our daily life. I think we've all had the experience, perhaps, of having a high ritual ceremony or some particular moment of insight in the practice, or some sort of peak kind of moment, like Jukai, for example, or, some particularly moving, like Tenka's funeral, for example, or something like this. There are these moments that come up, and they're very intense, and everything feels completely aligned, and we feel very alive in those moments. And then inevitably the circumstances change, and then there we are back in our apartment again, or our room, or whatever, and there feels to be this gap. And how can we close that gap, And some people mistakenly feel, oh, you've got to move into the temple and live in the closet. And they mistake that it's the building that's doing it, and it's not. It's your own heart and your own mind and your own body, well trained, produces these kinds of connective moments, you see. And so we have this daily liturgy, which is not by accident, very consciously designed. And this element of generating love and compassion is really quite central to the whole business. Okay. So the text that we have says this: generating love and compassion. Let's maybe recite it together. May all sentient beings be free from clinging and hatred, being close to some and distant from others. How wonderful it would be, may this be accomplished. I will free them from clinging and hatred. Bless me to accomplish this. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. How wonderful it would be, may this be accomplished. I will bring them happiness and the causes of happiness. Bless me to accomplish this. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. How wonderful it would be, may this be accomplished. I will free them from suffering and the causes of suffering. Bless me to accomplish this. May all sentient beings have the joy that has never known suffering. May they be free from clinging, hatred, jealousy, miserliness, doubt, pride, wrong view, ignorance, and dualistic thoughts. It would be, may this be accomplished. I will bring them to this state. Bless me to accomplish this. Okay. So in Mahayana tradition, this view is a requisite to actualizing the life of Buddha. Outside of this compassion, there is no Buddha. Okay. So, not optional. There's a poetic form here that's fairly self-evident. It begins with a may. May all, may all, may all, may all. May all sentient beings be. And, may is setting up the intention that it would be so. It is expressing the intent and intention. You're not asking Buddha to make a miracle so it'll come true. Okay? We're not asking Buddha to intervene or something. I'm not saying we don't ever, but that's not what this is saying. This is setting your own intention correctly, right? You're tuning the guitar nice and clean. My intent is that may all sentient beings. Now, sentient beings, the term all is self-evident. It literally means all sentient beings, okay? Not just the ones we're friends with or that we know, or even that are alive now, I would say. May all sentient beings. Sentient means an entity that can perceive, that has senses. Again, if I refer us to the Heart Sutra, we see there that it talks about eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, right? And this is absolutely essential to the thing, these senses. Sentient being is an entity that has senses that can connect and perceive. Mind is considered a sense, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Mind receives and generates thoughts. Mind wants to perceive thoughts, like eye wants to perceive objects and ear wants to hear sounds. This is the way it's spoken. The Buddha said that the ear is on fire with the desire to hear, and the eye is on fire with the desire to see, and the skin craves touch, the nose smells, and the tongue tastes, and so on, right? And so this business, why are we talking about this? Well, the Buddha taught very clearly that suffering requires senses. Okay, as far as we know, every chunk of stuff that's floating around the Oort cloud is completely fine. As far as we know, and we could be wrong, we don't really know, but we think, it seems to us, that they're not sentient. They're just chunks of carbon or whatever, and they're floating around out there, and they bonk into each other, and nobody's upset, and it doesn't matter, and it's fine. It's just cause and effect, but there's no thing that it's like to be an asteroid in the Oort cloud. There's no experienceable quality to it that we know of. Good to not pretend we know. I don't really know that that's true, but it seems that way. But an ant definitely has senses. It'll move towards things and away from things. It has instincts. There's not much, but there's some, like bacteria, parameciums, little organisms, The further up the chain you go, the more sense action that occurs, and that there's actually something there that we recognize as a life. I would say that there is a life to a rock. A rock has a life to it, quote unquote, a kind of a life. But it doesn't sense anything. Okay. So any being that has senses can suffer. And it's not because the being did something wrong and there's some punishment. It's simply the fact, if you have a nervous system, you will experience pain. This is how it is. And most beings then can suffer. If you get high enough in the cognitive kind of chain, I guess you would say, cognitively evolved enough, there's beyond just the experience of pain. And then for us, there's a running commentary. We now tell stories and we make meaning, and that can go horribly wrong or beautifully well. And so we say that may, meaning I have the intent that, I set my intention such that all, completely inclusive, not just the beings of this world, but any world. I recently was interviewed by The Blade, yet again, and they were asking me about space exploration and what does Zen have to say about aliens and stuff. And apparently this is a hot topic in some theological circles. Do we have to get the aliens to accept the Quran, for example? Is that required for their salvation? So you ask an imam that, pretty interesting answer. But anyway, my answer was quite contrary to most, because it was like, yeah, the sutras are filled with sayings like there are more world systems in the universe than there are grains of sand on the earth. So however many grains of sand exist on this planet, there's more other world systems than those grains of sand. And in each of those world systems, all of those grains of sand, there's more world systems than all of them. And it just keeps going. So Buddhism has a really vast cosmology, and it's filled with life. It's an alive universe. It's not a dead thing. There's percolations of existence in many, many, many unknowable to us world systems, and in many, many realms of existence. This is the six realms teaching, There's heavens, There's God realms, human realm, ghost realm, animal realm, ghost realm, and then different hell realms. And these are all different situations, realms, dimensions, I guess, which we can all experience in this life, and we've all visited all of them, I'm sure. But they're also considered to be actual dimensions of existence wherein there are countless beings suffering. And so when we say, may all sentient beings, we're actually intending that broad of a reach. And it also goes past time. It doesn't it's not limited to just the beings that are existent in this moment in time. Time itself is not necessarily this linear thing in the Buddha Dharma. Time is the same thing as being, is the same thing as change, is the same thing as nature. So your true nature is always, and so time is always, something like this. So it's a really all-encompassing intention. It's way better than may I have a better day. You know, can I just have a decent lunch for once, you know, or something, you know. That's okay too. I'm on board with that. I get it. But the mind of the Mahayana is really vast. And if you want to have some independent encounter with this, just take a look at the Avatamsaka Sutra, and it's like a tome, you know, and you could almost just open it to any random page, and you'll encounter a huge and vast cosmos. And it's quite beautiful, the mind state that we get in. And again, remember that all of this is really about shaping and directing our mind and our experience so that it's useful and holy and productive and wise, compassionate, all the good stuff. See? So may all sentient beings be, and then that's our setup, okay? So any questions on that chunk? Yeah, let's have the mic.
My name is Jinyo.
Mm-hmm.
Within all sentient beings, are we really
You're good. You're good. Yeah, just
extending the wish to like the paramecium and the ant?
yeah. I am.
Cool.
Yeah. May all beings be free of suffering. You know, the mosquitoes that irritate me so much in the summer, even them. You know, the predators, the prey, the plants, the vines, the weeds, the watermelons, the hippos. I mean, all of it. The cat, even the cats. But also beings on higher realms, you know. You know, in the sutras, it's taught very clearly that there are, in fact, other realms of consciousness, and that there are beings that inhabit these realms, and that they suffer too. Just because, you know, there's some entity out there that seems to us to have what we might think of as supernatural capacities or powers does not in any way mean that that being is not trapped in samsara. Very much they are. This is why one has to be very careful. There are certain spiritual cul-de-sacs to get stuck in where you think, not you, but one may think that the answer is in connecting with some other entity and asking it to do things, or capturing it and making it do things, or whatever. Not advised, you know. Mahasattvas are bodhisattvas that are functioning on a grand cosmological scale. Bodhisattvas are the ones that we see here day to day. Those folks are all good to connect with. Anything else, not so much. But may they all be free. So all the way up, all the way down. Okay. It's significant that in any world system where a Buddha arises, that Buddha discovers the Dharma. They don't create it, they discover it. And that Buddha will not teach until they are asked to teach. It always is this way. And it's significant that the highest God entity of that world system comes down and asks. So in our example, it is said in the stories that Buddha came to awakening, had the thought that this is too subtle to teach, and then Brahma, the sort of over God, the main kind of Lord God type entity, came down and asked Buddha to please teach, because even the gods are trapped. And so he said, okay. And so that pattern is said to play out in every single world system. And as a side note, this is a contrary impulse to the modern market forces that are pushing some to turn into salespeople. Not even as dignified as salesperson. It becomes a branded, owned thing that is marketed and owned, and it's not correct. The way it's supposed to happen is the student asks the teacher, and then the teacher responds. That's how it's supposed to go. It's not a fee for service. It's not for sale. You can't buy it. You know what I'm saying? But if you ask, it comes. All you have to do is have a sincere question, and it comes. And then the question of how do you facilitate it in our economy and our world, that's a trick. That's a trick, so we're all trying to navigate that. Anyway, may all sentient beings be free. Any other questions or comments from anybody? I'm looking over here at the online folks to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Seems okay. Okay. All right, so may all sentient beings be, and then we have the different. So the first one is free from clinging and hatred, okay? Clinging and hatred is a reference to 2 of the 3 poisons, right? The 3 poisons are greed, anger, and ignorance. Or said another way, clinging, hatred, and delusion. It's somewhat difficult to put precise English words on these things, but you get the feeling of it. Basically, clinging, which is the preferred term for me and for Dawn Sensei, clinging, it kind of expresses something about the essence of this particular ingredient to suffering, right? There's an attaching, there's a clinging that is completely unhealthy, okay? There's healthy attachment, there's healthy connection, and that's not what this is referring to. Clinging itself is inherently unhealthy, problematic, okay? Clinging. This is the ego, the small ego, trying to draw things into itself, to buff itself up, to make itself feel better, to be better than someone else, whatever. It's trying to draw in, okay, to capture, to control, to put badges and, or masks or whatever. It's trying to draw things in. Hatred is, of course, the opposite. That's where the ego is trying to push things away. And you can see this, someone is maybe, for a while, they're really obsessed with a certain person or a certain thing, and then you've seen very quickly it can turn into its opposite, on a dime, I'm obsessed with you, I hate you, and just, man, it just goes real quick, right? And really, because it's, in a way, it's 2 sides of the same suffering, right? This extreme drawing in and this extreme pushing away. What really happens is the mind constantly is vacillating back and forth between those 2 polarities. And the stuff is incidental. To the mundane mind, the stuff seems like what it's about, like, oh, I want these, or I hate these. It seems like it's about these. It's got shit to do with these. They just happen to be things in your environment of sense perception for that clinging to latch onto or to push away from. It could be anything. It doesn't matter. If you really investigate deeply, it's almost never about the actual thing. It's about this baseline unhealthy clinging or addiction or obsessive quality that finds an object. Here, my phone, that's it. And it'll drop this just as quick as it picked it up, but that energy will stay. It'll just trade obsessions. Or the hatred, right? The pushing away. It'll, maybe it'll love this and hate that, and then spend its time going back and forth between these two things. Or it'll love and hate the same thing alternatively. But that hatred actually isn't about the thing. It's not about that other ethnic minority or this other culture or this other political point of view, as abhorrent as a political view may be. It's actually not about that. It's actually about your own, not me. Essentially, the ego is saying, this is not me. No. That pushing away, that's what that is. Or I want. Does that make sense? So right off the bat, may all sentient beings be free from clinging and hatred. Like if you could actually wave a wand, kapoof, and make that go, I would do it. I've tried. I've proven to myself it doesn't work that way. But if you think of the worst human beings to ever have lived, your Pol Pots or your Hitlers or Mussolinis or whatever, Stalins, and worse that we never know their names, if you could take any one of those characters and actually free them from clinging and hatred, instantly all of the evil that they're acting on would cease. The reason why they're acting out in this way is that they are completely trapped by clinging and hatred. In a certain perspective, it's not even them doing these things. It's these unhealthy conditioning bundles, algorithms of habit energy in the mind presenting as a self that's kind of running out these patterns. And it's a horrible suffering. I mean, to have these algorithms running your life. A question? Yeah, please.
More than anything, I'm Chujin. More than anything, it's a comment of the feeling of compassion for those that you just discussed. To have identified it in such a way was an amazing aha for me, and that's where we find the compassion for even through all that evil.
Yeah.
It was wow.
Yeah, I mean, even someone who's really done us wrong. And that happens. And you would have by any measure, fair game to just hate their guts by mundane standards, right? But still, from the perspective of the Buddha, if that person was free from clinging and hatred, they wouldn't have done whatever this thing is that they did. It's the dysfunction, and it's the illness, if you would. It's the delusion is the base of this unhealthy action. That's actually what's the fault, where the fault lies. And that poor person is stuck with the karmic consequences of their action in this life or another. The shit's coming back at them. And it's horrible. So that's why I can say that there are people for whom boundaries need to be placed, lines need to be drawn. We need to be practical in a mundane way. There are certain people that they are no longer, they're not acceptable to be in this community. As accepting as this community is, it's not a guarantee. People have to be responsible and honor that Sangha covenant. And if they don't, they need to not come back. And this is rare, but it happens. But even in such a case as that, there's no ill will. None. There's a recognition of suffering and a being who's trapped in a way that precludes their ability to participate in this community or that family or this relationship or what have you. See? So the eyes of wisdom can see that and in a mundane way take the action necessary, and in a supra-mundane way may they be free from clinging and hatred. Anybody else? Yeah, Pujo, please.
This isn't. You've got the Zendo output turned off, right?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I okay.
Yeah, you can-
Sorry, I'm trying to control freak this from here. This what you said about karma. This is a little bit off the just the clinging hatred, but the people who they're clinging in hatred, that karmic energy is so strong and so like they may think that they're harboring this hatred in the name of love of some god or whatever but then they have children and the harm is so far reaching and all of those children are so harmed by this. So I have two separate families that I am involved with, and one adult said to me, "So what? I chose this. This is karma. I chose to." And immediately I'm like, "Well, yes, but like that's not the right answer." So, but yet, so they're born into this hideous like path, and so I guess that then is their Dharma gate, so to speak. If they choose to, they can break free of that.
yeah.
But then when they're at a certain age, but their childhood is just doomed to suck, basically.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to pull a trite phrase, it is what it is, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
if a youngin is born into a certain situation, that's the situation they're born into. And that's kind of a hard and fast, you know. But the truth is that if a person's causes and conditions are ripe, dharmically, they will be able to use any circumstance as a gate. There's literally no life circumstance possible that can't turn into a dharma gate. But the person's mind stream has to be ripe enough for that to be the case. And it's very unfortunate, but it's true, that a young person who's born into a tumultuous setting, they are going to have a lot to work through. But the causes and conditions of their dharma eye can use anything to awaken. So there's always possibility. There's always a way out. In any realm of suffering, there's always a bodhisattva that appears that's specifically tailor-made exactly to that realm. And the teaching there is that any place can be it. But it's rare. The far more common thing is cause leads to effect, which becomes cause, which leads to effect. And the main generator of karma is intention. And that's the slippery thing. So like that's why anything can be a gate. You know, you can be born into a horrible setting, but if your intention finds itself to be aligned correctly, that can become a way out. Does that make sense? Maddeningly, yes. There's precious little that you can do to intervene. I won't say there's nothing we can do, but it's very, it's very high level, and you have to be very cautious, and it's not good to get in there and do anything to try to like push people's mind streams in any direction. You know, so like Buddhist magic tends to focus on removing obstructions and obstacles, not try to force something to happen, but removing obstacles to progress. You know, that's the kind of area where we can help a little bit, sometimes a lot, but still the main driver is that individual person's mind stream. That's always in the governor's seat.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Please, Kansaya.
So it feels like the more of this clinging and hatred you're doing just constantly making more and more of an identity. I want this, I don't want that, I like this, I don't like that. And the more, if you're doing that, you're not going to be able to do the rest of this.
Not very well, no.
I mean, but like even on, I mean, Hitler aside, and that just in your own personal life, if you're not on this large scale, but just this small clinging and hatred, and it feels like it's like always there a little bit, no matter how free you become, it's still like it creeps back in. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there's still always this, like, how do you, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
You can actually let go of it. So it's like there are always tendencies in the mind stream, but remember, those tendencies of the mind stream are not you.
Right.
They're not. So there will be a karmic habit energy pattern, but that isn't you. And so once you learn how to wield correctly, then the fact of thoughts arising or feelings occurring is neutral. It doesn't matter. It's just weather patterns, There will always be weather. As long as there's an atmosphere, there'll be weather. On the moon, there's no atmosphere, so there's no weather. Okay, if you're a sentient being and you have mind, you'll have things you're attracted to, things you're repulsed by, things you're neutral towards. Any organism is like that. A white blood cell coursing through your system right now has got things it's attracted to, repulsed by, and doesn't care about. Instinctively, all the way up to squirrels and people and so on, right? But the grip that those tendencies can have is very workable. Very workable. Okay. But yeah, you'll feel the pull of things that pull and the push of things that push. But that's all. What most people do is they think that that's their identity. You know what I mean? And it's really not.
Aren't doing that.
Yeah, you need the mic though. So
Don't put it down.
yeah.
If you're letting that go, then it feels like sort of the opposite of what I said. Then all these things are going to just be arising.
Yeah. Compassion is our natural state. Our natural bound by clinging and hatred and illusion, our natural state is love and compassion. That's what's there. You don't have to generate it. It's funny, it says generating, but really that's your nature. What we have to do is like get the obstacles out of the way. That's why it's said that, and in many cases it's true, that when you have real insight, compassion automatically swells because you've gotten the main obstacle out of the way. The root poison is delusion, the false sense of the self. That's the basis on which clinging and hatred depend. If you see through that false sense of self, it's as though you take all the oxygen out of that candle flame. It's got nothing to burn. So clinging and greed and obsessing cannot coexist in one instant with hatred and repulsion. They can vacillate very quickly, but in one instance of mind, it's either one or the other. But they both coexist with delusion. Ignorance of the nature of the self is a cofactor that enables both of those to express. So you're right. When wisdom begins to open its eye and have more and more daylight, when you get more and more experience with equanimity and you feel in your body what it is to not be pushed and pulled by thoughts, compassion naturally is what's there. You can look out and see trees and have your world rocked, and how many trees have we gone by and not even noticed? So it's like that. Oh, good. Suju's got a hand up, please.
Just wanted to say that we have Nyojo it looked like he wanted to ask a question, and followed by Gyoshiki. So I'll turn it over to them.
Yeah, we can try. Suju, go ahead. It was a little quiet. I just kicked that up.
This is Nyojo. Can you hear me?
Kind of.
This is Nyojo. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but very little bit. But go ahead.
Okay. I am going to try to speak louder then, and I don't know how long the delay is, so I'll do my best. I haven't done it this way before.
Sorry, no, Joe, we can't really get you just yet. It's coming through the
Okay.
kitchen, though.
Oh, that's weird. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Yeah, we're good.
1.
Okay. I got you now, Neil. Joe, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. For those of us who grew up in the rough seas, healing's hard work, and compassion is there, but the block of I forget the name you put out there, but the block of, I'm just going to call them the dangerous people, is real. And I guess the question is, I mean, I am never going to feel love for one person who is no longer around, and it's okay. At least that's where I am right now. Maybe I will someday, but right now, for me, is it okay that I have the understanding that just letting it go so I can let go of the anger is compassion for both parties? Is that a reasonable place to begin?
Well, I want to honor the fact that there are some people and situations that are so horrible that for us to even consider wishing them well, it may be out of bounds. And it might be very much the case that that is beyond our imagining at this time.
And it may, oh, sorry.
If that is so,
it may come someday.
Yeah, let me respond if you would. If that is the case for somebody, then the most important thing is to simply recognize and acknowledge that fact. You can put a little bubble around that person and say, may all beings throughout space and time, except that one, you know. And actually it's okay, because, you know, there might be some psychological wounding or developing that needs to happen that hasn't yet happened. In a perfectly healthy, integrated human, there would be no need. However, in the real world, to use your word, the real world, there may be people that that's too much of a stretch. So one traditional answer is, and I like very much, is to, you know, take those folks that have been that horrid and abusive to us, or those we care about or whatever, and just give them to Kuan Yin to take care of, you know. You work on those folks, I can't. And that's okay. You know what I mean? That's a totally fine thing to do, you know. You got plenty of folks you can care about, mostly yourself included there, for sure. And then, you know, hold open the possibility that there may come a day when you too can see your way healthfully through to having a good will towards even this abusive person who did you wrong. And that includes even things like in our history where, you know, one village would come over and basically just enact genocide and wipe out the entire, you know, the Amalekites just slay them all. I mean, horrible, horrible scale destruction. The kind of warring that's going on in Ukraine. I mean, kids are trying to grow up, and there's robots out there trying to shoot them, and it's crazy, you know. Very reasonable to have some lines around these things for certain times at certain places for certain reasons. But don't just forego them. Give them off to a Mahasattva's care, recognizing, at least intellectually, that, you know, if Putin was completely free of clinging and hatred, this particular shitstorm would not be happening in Ukraine, as far as we know, right? And so I can still wish and intend that while, donating to the Red Cross in Ukraine. Does that help, Joe?
That helps very much. Thank you for your teaching.
Yeah, man. Stay with it.
You know it.
Anybody else? Please, yeah.
I'm trying to articulate this, but I was wondering if you could speak more to the removing obstacles with other people who are suffering from clinging and hatred. In particular, I'm like thinking about a person in my family that I'm very close with.
Yeah.
And sometimes in conversation, it's difficult to shy away from like dissing other people or things with him. And it becomes very intense and hard to like escape. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, you know, a lot of people identify with who they don't like. Like that's who I am. I'm the person who thinks those guys are, you know, idiots. And then people will bond around the one that they're excluding. There's deep genetic evolutionary reasons why we're kind of end up wired that way, which doesn't make it acceptable, but it is understandable. In any social group of mammals, who you can and cannot trust is like a big deal. So if you look at a community of bonobos or chimps, they spend a lot of time trying to suss out the character of the other bonobos. Who can they work with, who can they not work with, within a very small confine. So it's not just a human thing. Part of it is a survival thing, but it can go awry. it can turn into something very much unhelpful, right? So, one thing to say is that, there are, if you have an altar at home, and I hope everybody does, there's ways to make a physical space on that altar or a separate altar that's dedicated to particular people or situations in your life that you wish to exert some help to, right? There's the mundane kind of things you can do where you can just, try to be skillful in the conversation to shift it to other more positive topics. But that may or may not be skillful, it may or may not work, particularly if that person's identity is wound around these things. Well, you're not just talking about the thing, you're talking about that person's sense of themselves and what the world is and what things mean and why they're lovable or on the right side of things. It's not, like I said earlier, it's not just about the person they're excluding, it's about who they think they are in relationship to that in their own head. So the Hatfields were defined by their hatred of the McCoys. Of course, to anyone else, like, what the hell are you talking about? But to the Hatfield, it's a big deal. So if you start saying, hey, the McCoys aren't that bad, it's not just the Hatfield saying that the McCoy is a person, it's actually threatening their identity in their world, which is false, but to them, experientially true, right? So there's the mundane stuff of redirecting or even just intervening and saying, I've had a rough day. I don't feel like I want to keep talking negatively about these folks. I mean, I know we've heard you, but how about those mud hens, huh? And just, go there. The weather works. The game, whatever the game is, works sometimes. But there's also some people whose minds are so deeply entrenched that really they are not capable, you know. There are some people in my life that I love dearly that watch, you know, regrettable sources of information all the time, and it's almost impossible to not have whatever you say trigger right into the talking points that they've been listening to all day, every day, because that's what their mind stream is flooded with. It's difficult for them to even think of something outside of that because they ingest it so much. So if you have an altar, though, you can do some supramundane or some more magical ways of trying to help. You can make a certain space on that altar or set up a separate altar specifically for helping remove obstacles for that person's clinging and hatred and delusion. And so one thing that I tell the clergy here is that it's wise to have a book of intentions so that when people ask you to keep them in your intentions, you have one tome where you write these things down, you know, and you kind of keep, that's one way to do it. You have that on your altar. It's just your book of intentions. It's not just clergy folks. Anybody can do this. And you just write their name and a line or two about what the situation is, put the date, and bang, and it's on that altar, you know. And then every time you light incense, you know, in some way you're expressing the intention, again, that the stuff that you have in your book of intentions for yourself is in some way addressed. There's the view that, you know, this is exclusively tenderizing and opening your own heart, which it does tenderize and open your own heart, and it gives you some sense of not being a victim, being able to do something, being able to physicalize something in a way in response to this is actually very empowering. But there's also the view that actually these mahasattvas are out there floating around trying to do stuff. And you might get some attention from one of them, and they might come down and lend you a hand, you know. Like, things can actually shift. Like you know, the probabilities can start to lean a different way. The roundings can all start going the way you would hope rather than the way you wouldn't. And you can actually catalyze the removing of some obstacles, psychologically, spiritually, even physically even. It has to come from a very pure intention, though. You can't have any clinging or hatred or delusion in it, or else it'll perpetuate that. So that's why it's very tricky business. Does that make sense? Yeah. And sometimes, you know, like when someone that we love very much has died, and there's just nothing you can do about that except grieve well, then having an altar and knowing how to work with it and knowing how to give yourself the space to feel that and do something with it is incredibly empowering and really healing, and it leads to good grief. You know, and in the same way, there might be people and situations that you wish to influence that you may not be able to, but having a physical way of expressing that can be incredibly empowering and healing. And it can do some stuff. Okay? All right. Please end me. It's 3:25. When did we start? So it's like 90 minutes in and we haven't completed the first sentence? I'm a horrible teacher. Oh my God. Well, let's take a break, everybody. Oh my God. We're doomed. Okay. Can you pause the thing?
Can I ask that Gyoshiki be able to ask her question when we come back from the break?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so the troops are regathering. I just want to make sure that Bujo has started the recording thing again. So, Bujo? She has the phone of requirement, right? Jinyo, would you go get Bujo? Thank you. I think I should have that clock. Thank you. That might be a good thing for me to have around. I'll just put that there. Okay, so we're good? Thank you. All right, everybody. So we'll continue. And Gyoshiki is first on the queue with a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Loud and clear. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I hope this is a simple question. You said there's no circumstance in a life that can't be turned into a Dharma gate.
Mm-hmm.
And the 4 vows, Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. I always like that. Would you define a Dharma gate as just an opportunity for learning? Can you expound on that a little bit, what a Dharma gate is?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. It's a good prompt. So Buddha is true nature, which is no nature, to say it. And Dharma is specificity of expression. So this is a teaching stick, not a whisk. Okay? So the Buddha of this is no thing. And the Dharma of this is it's a teaching stick in the tradition from which I hold the Dharma. So when we say Buddha Dharma, we're talking about those two realities at once, like the hands together in Gasho, Buddha Dharma. So Dharma means law, but it means the expression of, okay? So it's not just the things that the Buddha taught, but it's every individual expression of Buddha nature is called a Dharma. So the sunlight that's kind of in my eyes, or the slight chill that's in the air, or the blue sky between the trees, all of these things are Dharma, 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 Dharma. And so the experience of encountering another person or a situation or a thing is a Dharma encounter. And what we say is when you encounter one Dharma, you practice one Dharma. Encounter one Dharma, practice one Dharma. And this is a great medicine because a lot of times it's like we encounter a Dharma and we go, ew, not this. Or, not that. Or, ooh, this one. And it's very simple. Just encounter a Dharma, practice the Dharma. As it shows up, meet it. Boom, right? And so that if we see everything, every individualized expression as Dharma, then that can become a gateway into encountering true nature. Because every individual Dharma is an expression of Buddha, therefore any individual Dharma can be an encounter, a way to encounter Buddha, so to speak. So this means that everywhere is just right. And this means that everything is workable. Everything is practicable. So if the Buddha Dharma as a religious tradition became illegal because of extremism or something, and I found myself incarcerated at some moment because I was a purveyor of propaganda or whatever they would call it. And I'm in some kind of weird concentration labor camp or something. My life situation would be radically unwelcome to me, for sure. But my practice of the Buddha Dharma would be no less. Because that happens to be what the practice is for me at that time. Therefore, it's a gate. And entering the Dharma is not a one and done. It's a constant tumbling into, like a relationship. Relationship with yourself, relationship with a life partner or a child or a parent or a career or anything. It's something that you, if it's healthy, you're constantly rediscovering it. It's fresh, it's new. Does that help, Yoshiki?
Yes, thanks. And I'd like to cling to those words, but they're already gone. So I'll just keep moving. Thank you.
Well, they are being streamed and recorded and eventually transcribed, but careful, don't make a nest. I mean, that is why, actually, a lot of Zen tradition really has the library locked, because we want to experience the things. But the words don't have to get in the way. The words can actually point us to and affirm what we've already experienced. That's actually the most useful thing about words is they, some percent they can inspire one to practice, therefore good. But some other percent they affirm our own experience. Like, oh yeah, I knew that. But it's just coming out of my language instead of yours. And it resonates true. And the more you practice, the more that can happen. And that's a very useful thing. Okay, so any other things before we move on? Okay. So having a clock in front of me this time, we'll try to get to another sentence. So, may all sentient beings be free from clinging and hatred. And then we have this example, being close to some and distant from others. That's the most obvious example of clinging and hatred we can conjure, right? And very practical in our life, being close to some and distant from others. May we be free from this. Basically, instead of us and them, it's all of us. All of us. Even the broken and the malformed. Still, it's all of us, right? How wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. These lines recur. How wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. And it's easy to sort of gloss over them, but actually, if you can imagine if you can imaginatively inhabit this world, except people were free from clinging and hatred, and this illusion of close to some, distant from others. Like if we could actually just flip that switch somehow, it would be incredibly wonderful, wouldn't it? Think of all the resources and time and human power and faculty that goes into shielding against enemies and controversy and espionage and war and all the rest. What we could accomplish if we didn't have to waste our energy on such stupidities. We could really be amazing. It could be really wonderful. So how wonderful it would be. Just imagine if our ancestors had pulled that off like 1,000 years ago and humanity actually figured this out. Can you imagine the world that we would live in right now? It would be just amazing. If even 500 years ago, humanity kind of figured this thing out en masse. So there's kind of an urgency to it. It's not only just ourselves being free from our own sufferings, but also not contributing to the passing on of dumb fuckery, of actually like contributing healthy, vibrant human civilization. It would be wonderful, may this be accomplished. And again, it's expressing the intent. When you hear that may, it's not, oh Buddha, please, will you go ahead and do this? I'm begging you to do it. It's not like that. It's expressing your own intention. My intention, as foolish as this may be, as unattainable as it may be, as unrealistic as it may be, I don't care about that. What I care about is the purity of my intention. So I intend to be a loving, kind father and life partner and guide and whatever. Reality is reality, but that my intention is like that. And it always comes back to that intention, regardless of how well or poorly I manifest it. So may this be accomplished. And then very significantly, it gets personal. I will free them from clinging and hatred. There's a bold statement, if ever there was one. Here it becomes very clear, I will. The first ones are, may it be so. May it be so. I intend that it is this. I intend this. I intend that. Now it is, I will. So it's a declarative. I will free them from clinging and hatred. Now the context for this vow, this statement of intent, is clearly rooted in the Mahayana view, which is infinite, nearly infinite lifetimes, rebirth after rebirth, with just eons and epochs of existence. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean like I'll get this done by lunch, but it's saying, you know what? I don't care how long. I believe it was Shantideva who said, as long as space and time exist and beings suffer, will I return to be of use. That says it. So that mindset, that orientation, whether you take it literally, imaginatively, or figuratively, is incredibly empowering. There's a unshakability to that mind. And as I often say, the further out you can zoom, the easier it is to handle the little things. When the little things get really big for you, it can be very difficult. But if you can step back and see a larger picture, it becomes easier, right? And so this is kind of like the ultimate long view. Right? Countless lives. And then finally, we have this, bless me to accomplish this. Now, this is asking for the blessing of the lineage. It's asking specifically, if you look at what's happened in the liturgy up to this point, we start with the Gatha of Atonement, we take refuge in the Nikaya tradition, then we have the 5 remembrances. This is all preliminary and essential. Then we do Mahayana refuge. And then in the Mahayana refuge, may I liberate suffering beings and bring them to great joy. That's not in the Pali Canon Nikaya tradition refuge. I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, right? It's a further unfolding of refuge. May I liberate suffering beings and bring them to great joy, right? Then we invoke and manifest in some way the lineage. I give thanks for the guidance of my teachers, the teachers before them, the lineage, blah, blah, blah. And so we have this kind of long scale presencing that we've done. We've invoked all of the lineage and all of the ancestors, including the Buddha and the historical Buddhas and cosmic Buddhas and the Buddhas of all world systems. Again, if you even play with the idea that there's more world systems than grains of sand, and the Buddha it shows up in each of these systems, it's a lot of Buddhas to call down. It's a lot of friends. You got a big team, you know what I mean? So invoking all these Buddhas, and then what do we do now that they're all invoked, now that they're all here in some way? We bow down in body, speech, and mind. We offer the best we have to give to fill the distance between us. physically, emotionally, developmentally, every way, right? And so now, requesting wise and compassionate guidance, dedicate merit. So where this is in the kind of arc of the story of the thing is that the lineage is present and you've done the basic bodhisattva practices. And then now you turn that outward and begin to have the intention, may all beings be free from clinging and hatred. So it's kind of like in the presence of the lineage with all those preliminaries in place, then we have this kind of grand mission statement kind of thing that happens, right? And so when it says, bless me to accomplish this, it's not just a throwaway phrase. Like in the storyline that's been unfolding here, you are in the presence of the entire lineage. So it's your teacher, it's their teachers, their teachers, their teachers, all the way to Shakyamuni Buddha, but not just that one Buddha. He's just one. All the Buddhas known and unknown in all the world systems that have ever been or will ever be. Bless me to accomplish this. Does that make sense? So it's a vast view of this, and it's, you know, in the lineage documents and stuff, we have Shakyamuni Buddha, and then there are the 7 historical Buddhas before him that are said to be of this world system in much more ancient times, hundreds of thousands of years ago, like way back prehistory, who knows, myth, legend, fact, I don't know. But the way the tradition says it is that there are 7 in this world system before Shakyamuni, which is, I don't know, interesting. But it's not just that, it's actually all world systems. So it's a lot of friends in high places. And so, bless me to accomplish this. It's asking for the blessing of the lineage, which is asking them to help remove obstacles for you, for your development, to be able to affect this for yourself and for all beings. Now from there, we have that basic same template that just repeats. The second stanza says, may all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. And this is an important thing to recognize, you know. Happiness really matters. Gutting it out is one thing. Surviving it is one thing. It beats the alternatives. But ultimately, the result of Dharma practice should be happiness in some way, in some form. Now, I'm not saying that grief and sadness are contraindicators of your practice. In fact, the kind of happiness we're talking about is entirely intact in the middle of such grief. It's authentic. In some ways, I think the word happiness may not be the best, but we go with it because I can't find anything better. It doesn't mean giddy all the time. It doesn't mean laughing, tee-hee-hee, all the time. It doesn't mean things are pleasant all the time. But there is a core quality of mind that is not just at ease, but is as positively engaged with its experience, even if that experience is sorrow or sadness or isolation or what have you. It's hard to talk about directly, but there's a freedom inside. There's a joy, there's a happiness, there's a quality that is unassailable in the midst of the churn. I think that's the best way to say it. So we're saying, may all sentient beings, in the first one, be free from clinging and hatred, be free from these poisons. And then the second we say, may they enjoy happiness. And it's important to realize that our practice should produce enjoyment, should produce happiness, at least in spots, at least in moments, you know. but it's a joyful thing. And it's so funny because, like, I can remember, like, the first time I encountered my first teacher, Roshi was a pretty severe guy, really, in a lot of ways. But there was a kind of a spontaneous joy that was always there. Like there's this little bit of a twinkle in the eye or a big twinkle in the eye. And it's not because everything's going his way. That is not the defining quality of it. That's very ephemeral, because just wait a while, the river's going to bend a different direction. Now it's not going your way. How's your happiness now? You know, you can't, if it depends on that, it's very low level. There's a kind of internally generated or internally realized happiness that is real. And I can remember being at Sesshin, and it sounds funny, but you know, like when I was living in the city, I didn't cook very much, and so there was all this really exotic takeout and all the food vendors in Boston, and all this kind of stuff, even on a student's budget. And then I'd go to the monastery for a retreat, and the food was really bland, like rice and and I remember at the beginning of the retreat, it'd be like, oh God, how am I going to survive? Where's the pizza? But by the end of the retreat, each meal was miraculous, and it wasn't that the meal was any different. It's the same, believe me, it's exactly the same on the Friday as it was on the Tuesday, but my perception of it was completely different. Instead of this being just bland and uninteresting, it was a miraculous occurrence. This raw carrot, and the carrot wasn't any different. It was me that was different. By settling down, I could perceive it, and I could actually enjoy it. Whereas when I was saturated in the tantalizing taste of the city, the carrot wasn't good enough to even consider. Something like this, right? The joy of sweeping the Zendo floor. I mean, it sounds stupid, but it's not. Like the joy in retreat of watching the snow fall, or smelling the incense, or just these very simple, the light coming in and hitting the Zendo floor and the incense. I mean, the whole thing, And then it's not just about those heightened experiences. It's actually daily life is like that. It can be like that. And there's some kind of a way in which this perception is a wholesome perception. It's a wholesome perception as opposed to an unwholesome perception. And that wholesome perception produces enjoyment. It's right relationship with the senses. Wrong relationship with the senses produces addiction, obsession, repulsion, disgust, whatever. Right relationship with the senses actually produces enjoyment and happiness. And we have to learn what right relationship with the senses is, because it's not obvious. So may all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. And again, the same business here, the causes and conditions that give rise to it, okay? So not just a false happiness that comes and goes, but actually having the causes ripe, okay? And then the same, may this be accomplished. I will bring them happiness and the causes of happiness. Bless me to accomplish this. Now we see the same thing in the next stanza. May all sentient beings be, and then free from suffering and the causes of suffering. Now, suffering in the Buddhist terminology is a very specific thing. The word is actually dukkha. It's not suffering. And again, suffering is a adequate but insufficient word in English to put there. The best thing to say really would be, may all sentient beings be free from dukkha and the causes of dukkha. Except that no one knows what the hell that means, and so you have to say something that's meaningful. Suffering, again, is as close as we can get, but it's kind of inadequate. The real meaning of it is something closer to relentlessly unsatisfactory. And I mean relentlessly unsatisfactory. May all sentient beings be free from the relentless unsatisfactoriness of life and the causes of this relentless unsatisfactoriness. That's really what it's talking about. It's not saying, again, be free from grief or sadness or melancholy or anything. Those things are fine. That, you know, when I'm sad, I'm the Buddha of being sad. That's fine. When I'm depressed, I'm the Buddha of being depressed. That's fine. There's no suffering there. Suffering is something else. It's far worse. Just depression is one thing. Depression with dukkha on top is far worse, exponentially worse, and entirely optional. So, being free from the causes, being free from the reliably unreliableness. You can depend on its independability. It's reliably unreliable. It's constant shifting. Something like this. This is all what's being implied when we say, may all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So at a face reading, it can seem like you're saying the same thing 3 times, and in a way you are, but actually it's very specific, right? Clinging and hatred. That's the most expressing the root causes of dukkha. Below that is delusion itself. And then enjoying happiness and the causes of happiness, wholesomeness and the causes of wholesomeness. And then may all sentient beings be free from dukkha and the causes of dukkha. How wonderful it would be, may this be accomplished. I will free them from dukkha and the causes of dukkha. Bless me to accomplish this. And it should be kind of ringing in your ears, the Four Noble Truths. The truth of dukkha, the cause of dukkha, that dukkha can be alleviated, and the path to doing so. This is fundamental, base, necessary teaching that everybody should have a sense of. Okay. So before I move into the last stanza, perhaps it would be a good time to pause and field any questions if there are, or comments. Please, Enmei. Do you have the, thank you.
I'm Enmei. You were saying about the line, bless me to accomplish this. I understand about the lineage, and I totally get that. But I also feel when we say that out loud in front of anyone other than ourselves, we're asking the people around us to bless us. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I think that's a lovely insight, you know. In our community, you know, we have 2 ordinations happening tomorrow. And one of the requirements for an ordination is not just that myself and Doan see a priest, but the Sangha has to see a priest. The Sangha blessing is absolutely critical to that. Can't happen without the Sangha blessing, right? And the same thing with the transmission, you know. The transmission, the first level of the transmission is Denkai, and that's when the teacher sees a teacher, but then you wait for Denbo until the teacher can manifest an appropriate mandala. And if they can't, the other part doesn't come. Because the Sangha blessing has to be there. There has to be, the Sangha has to gather and affirm this. And then the next level comes. And then once that's in place, you have to wait a while and have the person actually manifest in that role and not screw it up. for some time, and then Inca comes. It's something like that. And so I think in the same way, what you're saying is really makes a lot of sense to me. It feels right to me, bless me to accomplish this. Because the other thing that's true is that, everyone who takes refuge is on the track of Buddhahood. And sooner or later, in this life or some other one, you will realize it. And you will be a Buddha to a world system, and you will help alleviate suffering. So why wouldn't you ask all the Buddhas, including those around us? And we're all Buddhas sitting here right now, to be sure, even without the story stuff, right here, right now. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. Jinyo? Yep. I would say one further thing on that. I feel that when I recite this, I definitely feel like I'm asking the Sangha to bless me, to help me to accomplish this, for sure.
Could you speak a bit more about the difference between suffering and just depression?
Yeah. Dukkha and depression. Okay, dukkha and grief. Dukkha and loneliness. Basically, any mental state that's experienceable can be a cause of dukkha or not, including pleasant states. Excitement, endorphin, dopamine saturated moments of wonderness, they can also be causes of great suffering. So it's not just the negatives, it's also the happy stuff, right? How do you be in right relationship with a beautiful experience, for example? So like to talk about the inverse first, it's very possible to have a heightened experience that's very pleasurable and very satisfying and very dopamine saturated, and that can turn into a massive cause of suffering. Because even as you're experiencing it, it's ending. Like the most incredible meal, you're devouring it as you enjoy it. So with every bite, it's less. Do you know what I'm talking about? So there's this kind of quality that if you have this beautiful meal and you want that to just stay forever, it's not possible. And not only that, eventually you get sick of it. If you have that most amazing meal every day, eventually it's like, ugh, So it's not just the lows, it's the highs. Knowing how to be in right relationship with the things when they're good is a skill that is counterintuitive. It is swimming upstream because your cells are designed or evolved rather to cling towards pleasure and flee from pain. Fair enough. But when we learn how to be in right relationship to pleasure and to happiness and to the fun things, it's because we don't cling on to them, we don't make them something they're not, and we don't make them our identity. My identity is not this peak ecstatic experience. They come sometimes, but if you think that's who and what you are and that's what life really is, you are doomed. Because you will come down from that. And then you will chase to get it again, and it will never be quite what it was. You know what I'm saying? So that's right relationship to the good stuff, and it's basically the same thing as right relationship to the troughs, okay? The grief, the sadness, the depression. There is a way to be in right and wholesome relationship with these most unwelcome states of mind. And the first thing is to realize that that is not you. That peak experience is not you, and that depth experience is not you. It's just weather patterns. There's pleasant weather, there's scary weather, but you are the sky, you're not the weather. The weather's there, but the weather is not your true identity. So right relationship with the peaks and the valleys means being free from dukkha in the peaks and the valleys. It's not that there aren't peaks and valleys any longer. Being alive means there's peaks, valleys, and midlands. being in right relationship to them means there's no clinging and there's no hatred. So in that old good morning heartache, right? When it's back, when the blues is there, there's a right relationship to the blues, which doesn't try to pretend that you don't feel in the blues. But the right relationship to the blues is just be the Buddha of the blues. It's like this. I think that's probably the best language I can use around it. It's the part that's tricky about it is we would prefer to never have the blues. And that will always be true. It's not like the Buddha of the blues is happy about the fact. It's still the blues. But there's a way of being wholeheartedly, wholesomely in right relationship with that state. Does that make sense? It would be as though we made an enemy of our own body, telling ourselves, my body is so-and-so, and it should not be so-and-so, and therefore I am wrong, and the world is wrong. When in fact, your body is exactly the way it is. And there are medicines, there's eating well and not well, there's all kinds of genetics, but the whole mix of everything, your body is exactly your body. And so if you're going to be able to do anything with it, you have to accept it. And then maybe there's some things you might want to do. Take the medicine, go see the counselor, drink more water, do some lifting, these kinds of things. And it's the same thing with emotional states. Okay? All right. Bujo? Yeah.
This is about what you just asked, Jinyo, because this is a theme that comes up a lot not just with depression, but with, I guess also a part of it is, this is a much used phrase, but a radical acceptance of the depression or of the whatever as just what it is, no more, no less, not you, not because it's not you, it's a weather pattern, but it may be one that you have and that you have had forever. But I think there's a way to not like clench against it and go, no, this has to go away, this has to go away. Well,
yeah,
you have to just practice with it and acknowledge it.
Yeah. I mean, the most ready example is grief. It's the easiest one to understand it with, I think, because grief, if someone close to you dies, whether it's your pug or your grandma or whatever, your sibling, God forbid your kid, like grief is a fact, and everybody can recognize that that's a fact, And then we all kind of have heard about the stages of grief. Oh, there's the denial, and then there's the anger, and then there's the haggling, and and then you go through these stages, and it's not like when you go through the stages, grief is gone. We know better. Grief is there, but now you're in a wholesome relationship with grief. So there's just the grief. There's not the extra stuff. It's something like that. So depression or elation, again, elation can be just as damaging as depression. People who are chasing the heightened states all the time, you know what I mean? Like these video games that are constantly dripping dopamine-inducing moments, bang, 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 bang. Dukkha is everywhere. So the thing is, how do we recognize what is authentically rising and encounter one dharma and practice one dharma? Whether that's elation or depression or anything in between. It's not like elation is bad or depression is good. I'm not saying that. But the ability to meet what is so and practice it authentically is what's required. And I would prefer elation 10 times out of 10. I'd prefer pleasure 10 times out of 10. Doesn't happen that way. Okay? Anybody else? Suju, please.
It's a question about a different aspect of suffering. I saw some conversations online that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, and I wanted to know what your opinion is on it. And it was regarding the idea that we should be very cautious about helping other people, because we don't want to interfere with their karma or something. And I don't know, to me that kind of flies in the face of compassion. I mean, I totally understand, like, you don't want to enable people, you don't want to do things that may seem like they're kind but they're actually hurting someone. I understand that. But I'm concerned about the idea that people might use this notion as a way to excuse themselves from being compassionate and helping people when in fact they should, even though it might be uncomfortable or hard.
Yeah.
That's my question.
Well, I mean, people have all kinds of ways of creating problems for themselves and others, you know. And so it's yeah, it would be regrettable to somehow encounter the Buddha Dharma and think it means therefore I don't need to care about anybody. I don't know how you'd get that, but it's clearly contrary to the Dharma as I know it. However, there is unskillfulness. That's for sure. And there's lots of things we just have to be humble and bow and recognize this is beyond anything I can overtly do anything with. So humility, hat in hand, there are moments where we would do well to remember that we actually don't know all the time what actually is the best, and that's true. But the intention should always be to be of the most use to alleviate the suffering for those beings as possible. So sometimes the most skillful thing a parent can do is stand back and let Junior tumble. And then sometimes the most skillful thing a parent can do is guide them, you know, put on the floaties, make sure Junior's safe. So it's like that. Okay? All right, anything else? Okay. All right, so let's move on to the last business here. This somewhat cryptic statement, sometimes it can seem, may all sentient beings have the joy that has never known suffering. What the heck is that? It's talking really about true nature. That which is beyond yin and yang, up and down, yes and no, happy, sad. The true equanimity that is your true nature, that is beyond any kind of dukkha. Okay, the ego, the small separate self, is the self that suffers. That self actually is an illusion. So the true self actually knows no dukkha, to say it that way. It's a matter of realizing that self, actualizing that self, giving life to that life. That's always been there. So may all sentient beings have the joy that has never known suffering. You could say, may all sentient beings come to complete and full awakening of their true nature. It's kind of a synonymous statement. And suffering, again, doesn't mean pain or grief or despair. It means dukkha, this fundamental misperception of the nature of reality, expecting everything to be fixed and permanent when in fact nothing is fixed and permanent. That's dukkha. The fact of impermanence itself is not dukkha. That's just change, that's fine. So may all sentient beings have the joy that has never known suffering. And then we have here listed, this is sort of like the antagonist to the list of the paramitas that we have earlier. When we invoke the lineage, we speak of devoted practice of generosity, moral discipline, patience, joyful effort, concentration, wisdom, skillful means, unshakable vow, spiritual powers, and awakened awareness. Okay. Now, the sort of antagonist to that is this sort of program of suffering, clinging, hatred, jealousy, miserliness, doubt, pride, wrong view, ignorance, and dualistic thoughts. Like if you wanted to fling a curse at somebody, and I don't suggest you do, fling this at them, and they'll suffer. If you could do such a thing, don't, right? But this is basically like a map of the terrain of dukkha. And the biggies really is clinging, hatred, and ignorance. And then we have got some kind of, fill it out a little bit, jealousy. Clinging we've talked about, that's the drawing in, hatred is the pushing away. Jealousy is looking at someone else's experience and feeling less because of it. Okay, there's a diminishing of the self that occurs when you encounter someone else's magnificence of some way, or something they have that you imagine you don't, right? That's that particular flavor of clinging. Miserliness is this kind of hoarding instinct of trying to keep everything, and then particularly in relationship to other beings, not being willing to share anything. It's a little different than just clinging. Clinging is I want. Miserliness is I want and I won't give you not a single piece of my treasure. Not one piece. That's the miserliness in it, okay? Doubt. Interesting, the 3 pillars of Zen famously, what was it? Great faith, great doubt, great perseverance. That doubt, again in English, doubt is maybe not the best word, but it means having a great fervor in the question of who am I? Like taking the question of your who you are seriously, intensely seriously. That's the doubt that's being talked about there. This doubt is doubt in yourself, doubt in the path, doubt in the teachings, doubt in the teachers, the mundane kind of doubt like you would think. Because you can always say something like, yeah, but after all, and then just write anything you want. And the mind will sort of like assume that everything else went before is just kind of null and void. You know what I'm saying? Like there's little mental cul-de-sacs we can get into where we talk ourselves right out of our best selves. So the kind of doubt where you doubt your own capacity to come to awakening, just get rid of it. It's stupid. Just get rid of it. The doubt in the teachings, come on. Just come on. Enough. Just get to work. I'm not sure about them. Okay. Spend another decade wondering about it. When you're ready, come see me. And that's fine. Your choice. But really, at this level, if you're engaged, just don't even play around with it. You don't need to. You need to in the beginning. You need to really put the Dharma up against everything your critical thinking can throw at it. But after a while, enough. Now let's get on with it, shall we? I liken it to when I actually realized that I was in love with Doan, I was stunned that happened to me. like this. I had no self-concept that that would ever be a reality in my life because I was foolish, but still, I didn't believe it, but it was totally true. But I threw everything I had at it. And after a while, it's like, you know what? No, this is actually true. We're going to get married, and that's the deal. It's good to question it. Is this really the person? Am I true? Am I just infatuated? Is this just hormones? What is this? Is this real? Is this the real thing? That kind of doubt, okay. But after a while, enough. You make the decision, and do you know what I'm saying? It's like this in the Dharma. There are people who talk themselves out of it constantly. And it's not my job to talk them into it. I don't see that as my role. I don't do that. I'm not trying to persuade anybody of anything, actually. If someone's already interested and they want the teachings, I will combust my life giving that, but I'm not going to try to convince anybody of anything. I'm not into it. If I have to convince a person, they're not there. When it's healthy, what it looks like is you hear the Dharma and you go like, I knew that. That's kind of what it looks like. Not everything, but largely it's like that. It's like familiar. It's anciently new, and it's familiar, and it feels right. And then like this, you're not getting your arm twisted to do it, right? So you have to have a correct amount of doubt in the sense of really scrutinize things fully, and that does stay. But this doubt is like, oh, I'm not sure. After all, couldn't this all just be bullshit? You can say that all the time and negate all your progress, and it just doesn't help you. Pride, making a thing of your awesomeness is a big problem. Firstly, your awesomeness is probably greatly exaggerated. And secondly, making a thing out of it is just always the mistake. There is no thing. Making a self out of this awesome is no different than making a self out of this depression. Mistake, 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 and not a good mistake. Like high consequences, high stakes mistake. Wrong view. Now we're getting more to the root of things. Like as I said earlier, ignorance is the base cause of dukkha. It expresses as greed and anger or hatred, clinging and repulsion. But the root of it is wrong view, not recognizing the self as the self, misperceiving who and what we are and who and what life is, which is what ignorance is, delusion. In Buddhist teachings, it's a very specific thing. Ignorance means not seeing the nature of the self. And it is deep. It is extraordinarily deep. It's like if you tried to hold your breath forever, eventually your lungs would force you to inhale or exhale. Your cells will force you to breathe at a certain point. It's like that. Like the ignorance, the dualistic way of seeing the life is like fiercely, it feels integral, but it's fiercely a part of the ego's way of existing. And it has to do with language and the causes and conditions that are unknowable. Some are knowable. But it's this fiercely deep thing. You can't solve this in a weekend workshop or punching through a couple of koans, attending a retreat. I mean, it's a lifetime process, at least one, probably more. And dualistic thoughts. This is the language barrier. This is the prison of our own words, our own thinking. Me, mine, you, yours. So may all sentient beings have the joy that has never known suffering. May they be free from clinging, hatred, jealousy, miserliness, doubt, pride, wrong view, ignorance, and dualistic thoughts. And then we close with the same, how wonderful it would be. May this be accomplished. And then the declarative, I will bring them to this state. And then, please help me, bless me to accomplish this. So within this generating love and compassion text, we have a pretty clear map of dukkha and a pretty clear map of the mind of bodhicitta, what it means to be a bodhisattva in the world. This world or any other world, by the way. Wherever sentient beings arise, it's possible for some one of those entities to perceive the Dharma. And when they do, and they will be asked to teach. And then this thought of coming to awakening for the sake of all beings will then be perpetuated in that world system. And the teachings say, interestingly, that until it dies out, and then it will be rediscovered again. And so for us in this place, and this time, and this incarnation, and this world, this building, may we completely realize this generation of love and compassion for ourselves, for the people we love, for the people we don't love, and for everybody. May it be so. Any questions or comments on this last chunk? In May, yep.
I think I'd like you to talk a little longer about the wrong view / ignorance, I'm not sure where it falls into, of the trap of people hearing something, whatever it is, and going, oh yeah, I got it. But their schema, their filter, their view through which they've processed it is wrong. Like, it's harmful.
Yeah.
Can you just speak on that a little more?
Oh, yeah. It's rampant. The fact is that let us say that you've always been diseased, but you don't know it, because everyone around you has the same disease. And so someone who's healthy says, oh yeah, it's like this. And you go, yeah, I know. But you don't. But you don't know that you don't know, because all you've ever known is that disease. Right? And so it's kind of like that's kind of what it's like. And the disease is, I know. That's the disease. I know it, or that, or whatever. And it's very, I don't know, it's, it can devour anything. That's the problem with it. You can take the most wholesome, true teaching possible, even beautiful encounters of reality, and that disease will co-opt the whole thing and rewire it into its own image. And it's why in Zen training, it takes a lot for a person to actually shake that stuff off. We have to have somebody that we trust, in a community that we trust, to be willing to actually receive no. And yes, in one of the telltale signs is that if, a person is not really ever willing to put themselves in a situation where they can be guided or corrected, then it's almost certain that they don't have it. Because one of the hallmarks of someone who has got some realization, as I said earlier in the day, is you realize something is lacking. You know you don't know, and there's a longing to keep tumbling further into. And there's a lot of humility, and there's a lot of joy that comes from this. So it's very difficult to work with somebody who's convinced that they know. In fact, it's impossible. And I don't know why. I wish there was some maneuver I could do that would shake that out of somebody, but there isn't one that I know. They have to be ripe enough. Not all the way ripe, but they have to be ripe enough for some healthy doubt to show up. And for most people, it has to do with really having dukkha just smack them upside the head in spite of their cognitive stories. And all their stories and all their ideas and all their mental constructs do not in any way stop that paddle from smacking that ass. Bang, and it hurts. And so a lot of people, when it hurts enough, they're willing to say, I need help. Kind of like in the recovery community, you have to hit what's called bottom, and then you can start. Somewhere along the line, that ego, if to be attracted to the Dharma, either that ego gets hit so hard that it finally says, I can't do this, or this isn't working, and then they can begin to practice Dharma. Or some people just have a natural affinity for the Dharma. They just, even though they have the, they're under the sway of wrong view, their instincts are already so Dharma aligned that as soon as they see it or feel it, they just go right to it. That happens too. It's not like everybody has to have some great calamity to come to the Dharma, but often. And for somebody who's stuck in that, there's nothing I can do except just generate love and compassion for them, be a presence as long as it's healthy for me and works, and just be there when it falls apart on them. Yeah, some of the most difficult people to work with are the ones who really think they know it. And particularly if they've got a good rap. Like there have been people in the Doksan room that have written books on things that they don't have any experience with, actually. But they're published, way more than me. I'm not published. They've got books on the subject, and they haven't had the first little baby insight. But they can talk about it credibly, because they've read this and they've read that, and they can quote this one and quote that one and draw parallels and all the academic stuff. And the problem is they're so good at the rap that they won't let themselves drop the story enough to experience. So in the Dhammapada it says the spoon never tastes the soup. So it's something like that. So may the spoon turn into a tongue. But the problem with that is that the tongue can experience pain. It's safer to be a spoon, says the ego. Do you know what I'm saying? It's better to not feel things and just have the ideas. But it doesn't work. Anybody else? So on, yeah.
It seems like we need to get, or I need to get validation from the outside on the work I'm doing on the inside. Like, is that right? Am I doing it right?
Yeah, you do. I mean, you need a human Buddha that you can interact with that can say, yeah, man, or like, no. That's same for everybody. The only one that wasn't true for is actually Siddhartha Gautama. He actually didn't have a teacher of the Buddha Dharma. He had teachers, believe me. He studied all the options that were on offer at the time, and he was good at it.
Who's that again?
Buddha.
Oh.
Sid, all right, Siddhartha Gautama. But he as a person, and this is when I say a Buddha appears in a world system, when the sentient beings, as the sutras teach anyway, when the sentient beings evolve enough to have a sense of ego, then eventually one of them will arise that has the karmic causes and conditions to see through that ego, and they will discover it without a teacher. So that's what makes Shakyamuni Buddha our founding teacher. That's why he's a place of primacy. He is not in essence any different from any of us. He's not something you can't be, but ever since him, Mahakayasapa needed to study with the Buddha and interact to bring his awakening to fruition. And then Ananda needed to study with Mahakayasapa to bring his awakening to fruition. And it's been like this ever since, through all generations. And it certainly is the case with me, it certainly is the case with my teachers, and their teachers, and whatever successors we have and students they may have someday. This is how it is. So we need a human Buddha that's in a form that we can interact with, in whom the wisdom, the heart of wisdom, is completely awakened. It's a necessary fact. And that's why having a living, breathing teacher that will put up with you is such a rare thing and such a precious thing. And that's why there's such a devotional quality traditionally around the lineage and the teachers and stuff like this. Not because they're orders of being higher than we are or anything like that, but just that there's actually, like, I can actually interact with this person. And eventually you don't need them anymore. But you're good, you know, and you don't have to have received transmission to be in that place, but you training can get to a point where basically you really do know what your life is and how to live it and what things are. But that's because you've gone through the process of being affirmed and guided by another person in whom that was fully awake. It's like that. And, you know, I don't know. I always say that, you know, I'm a pretty fast gun as far as these things go, and I never would have found the real deal without a teacher. Never. Because I'm too, I can think I know things and make a shrine out of that, and it's deathly problematic. So it's got to be somebody who demonstrably has experienced an integrated awakening that is willing to interact with me. And it has to be in a package that I can relate to, by the way. That matters. There are lots of, not as much as there should be, but there are teachers around, and not any one of them is the right teacher for every student. And not because something's wrong, it's just like it has to be somebody you can relate to that makes sense. And I don't mean that you get along with. That's not what I mean. It means that them as a teacher works for you, for helping you unlock the causes of dukkha. It's not about being pals and stuff. You can be pals, but that's not about that. So in that way, needing the approval of the outside is correct. And that's part of why we have all the liturgies and the rituals, which are basically historically informed setups for blessing. So what we'll all be doing tomorrow in the ordination ceremony is a contrived setup. But it works and it's real. And the whole point of it in that particular ceremony of ordination is for us all to acknowledge these vocations that are coming to fruition and to bless them and to recognize them and to empower them. And then that, when it works, gives the new priest a kind of capacity to be a bodhisattva in the world that is different than if they don't ever have that. And that's coming from the outside, quote unquote. But we do that together. Does that make sense? Yeah. I will never forget, I hope, that moment in Angola Road where, because I'd never seen an Inca Shome ceremony before, and when Roshi had me stand up and we dropped our bowing claws together, and he said, he will go down as a sensei and come up as Roshi. And so we bowed together. If you were there or you recall, but I don't know, I bowed thousands of times But that was one bow. And I remember that exact moment, and then coming up. And then those, I don't know how to put words on that, but it matters. Being able to be in that moment, in my case, is not something I could do on my own. Say it like that. I can't just do that for myself. And people that try to, they're full of shit. They really are. And a lot of people try. Like, I had awakening in the dream. I'm good. No, you're not. You know what I mean? Even if it was a good dream, no. There's got to be more than that. So we do that for each other. We all help each other all the time. We bow to each other all the time. We serve each other all the time. We practice together. We laugh together. We cry together. Sangha. Any others? Okay. All right. Well, seeing none, my God, we have 10 minutes to spare. Luxury, exactly. So let me just bring it to a close then by saying that having situated this in the teachings of equanimity and compassion, knowing that the Prajnaparamita teachings of the Heart Sutra are on the horizon, let's dedicate the merit of this time together to all those beings that are trapped in dukkha. May they have the obstacles to their awakening removed. And for those of us who have developed strong equanimity, may we not be trapped there. May we not hide there. May we continue to hear the cries of the world. And may we respond to them with love and compassion for all beings throughout space and time, and for these beings in this room and in this field of connection, and that is the Buddhist Temple of Toledo Sangha. May it be so. All right, thank you, everybody. Yes, and thank you to our Zoom host. Good job, y'all.
Thank you, Suju and
Kanchan,
Kamshin.
Suju. Thank you, Gyoshiki and Yojo. Take the rest of the day off.